We will find the inverse of y equals negative x plus 3. Anytime you see y equals in a function, it's the same thing as writing f of x. So if you see f of x or y, it's the same thing. Whenever we find the inverse, you can note it as this or as this, one of the two. But to find the inverse, your first step is to switch the x and the y, trade their places, and then go through and solve for the y. So to get the y by itself, we move the plus 3 to the left, change the sign, and the last thing to get the y by itself is to divide both sides by a negative 1 because of the negative y. So that would be a negative x plus 3 equals the inverse of y. Let's find the inverse of y equals 2x minus 4. Our first step is to trade places with the x and the y. And then we want to solve so that we can isolate the y. So we're going to move the minus 4 to the left. And then we would have to divide both sides by 2. Which would leave us with x plus 4 over 2 equal to y. And this will be the inverse of y. Let's find the inverse of y equals a negative 1/3 x plus 6. Switch the x and the y. And then begin to isolate the y. Move the plus 6 to the left, change the sign. And now we have to get rid of the fraction of a negative 1/3. What you can do is multiply both sides by a negative 3. If you do that, it will get rid of the fraction and the negative sign on the y. So negative 3 times the quantity x minus 6, and you're just left with y. But expand it out to negative 3x plus 18 equals the inverse of y. Let's find the inverse of y equals 3x minus 4, all of that over 2. It's still the same process. Switch the x and the y. And now you have to begin to get the y by itself. What this really is here is a proportion in which you can cross multiply to get 2x equals 3y minus 4. And to start getting the y by itself, you would move the minus 4 to the left, change it to plus 4, and then you would have to divide both sides by 3. So 2x plus 4 over 3, and then set it equal to y, and that'll be your inverse. Let's find the inverse of y equals the square root of x plus 6. Again, you're going to switch the x and the y, and then you want to get y by itself. The only way you can get y out from underneath the square root sign is to square both sides, which leaves me with an x squared on the left. And if I square the square root of y plus 6, I just have y plus 6. Move the plus 6 to the left, change the sign, and there you have the inverse of y, x squared minus 6. We will find the inverse of y equals the square root of 2x plus 1, and then minus 4. Notice the minus 4 is outside the square root sign. So switch x and y. And then begin to undo everything. And when we follow the order of operations, we do multiplication and division before we do addition and subtraction, but now we're doing it in reverse. So we would have to move the minus 4 to the left to make it plus 4. And that leaves us with this on the right. And instead of square rooting, we're going to square both sides. When you do that, you're left with the quantity squared of x plus 4 on the left. On the right, it's just 2y plus 1. Now you can move the minus 1 to the left. And be left with 2y on the right. Divide everything by 2. So the inverse of y is the quantity squared of x plus 4, close the quantity, minus 1, and then divide by 2. Our first move here is to switch x and y, and then we want to start isolating y. Let's move the minus 10 to the left, and then we're going to have to divide by a negative 3. Whenever you have a negative 3 in the denominator, you want to get rid of that negative and change the sign of everything in the top. So it's a negative x minus 10 over 3 equals the inverse of y. To get the inverse, we have to switch x and y and then start isolating for y. Recognize that x over 1 is the same thing as x, so you can cross multiply to get 4x equals negative 2y minus 3. Move the minus 3 to the left, and then you're going to have to divide both sides by a negative 2 to get the y by itself, but don't forget that when you have a negative number on the denominator by itself, you change it to positive and change the sign of everything on the top. This is your inverse. We have to switch x and y and then start to isolate y. We need to square both sides to get rid of the square root symbol. So x squared equals 6y plus 8. Move the 8 to the left, and then you're going to divide by 6 to get the y by itself. So your inverse is x squared minus 8 over 6. To find the inverse here, we have to switch x and y. So we'll do that first and then begin to isolate y. Let's move the minus 2 to the left. And then to get rid of the square root sign, we have to square both sides. So we're left with the quantity squared of x plus 2 and set that equal to 3y plus 5. Move the plus 5 to the left, make it minus 5, and then from there we're going to have to divide by 3, and that will give you the inverse.